Dr. Freeman Hrabowski, president of UMBC since 1992, is a consultant on science and math education to national agencies, universities, and school systems. He was recently named by President Obama to chair the newly created President's Advisory Commission on Educational Excellence for African Americans. He also chaired the National Academy's committee that produced the recent report, Expanding Underrepresented Minority Participation, America's Science and Technology Talent at the Crossroads. Named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine and one of America's best leaders by U.S. News and World Report, he also received TIAA-CREF's Theodore M. Hesburgh Award for Leadership Excellence, the Carnegie Corporation Academic Leadership Award, and the Heinz Award for contributions to improving the human condition. This guy's awesome. Please help me welcome Dr. Hrabowski.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I begin with poetry. William Carlos Williams once said that it's difficult to find news in poetry, and yet men and women die miserably every day because of a lack of what's found there. And these are words from the late Maya Angelou. Lift up your eyes upon this day breaking for you. Give birth again to the dream. Women, children, men, take it, this dream, into the palms of your hands. Mold it into the image of your most public self. Sculpt it into the shape of your most private need. Here on the pulse of this new day, you may have the grace to look up and out and into your sister's eyes and into your brother's face and say simply, very simply with hope, good morning. Good morning, Ohio. Give her a round of applause for poetry, for poetry. I am going to be the embodiment of innovation, if I can, today in teaching and learning. And I'm beginning by not having slides for you. Give me a hand for not having slides today. I always shock people because I come from a campus that is at least 60% science and technology through the PhD in IT, computer science, cybersecurity. I am a mathematician, and people expect me to begin with a lot of slides. And I purposely, in groups of this size, larger and smaller, want to have conversation with people. I want to be able to look into the faces of people. So I said, as much as you can have the lights up, I know you've got to have that, but as much as we can have the lights up, I like to see your faces, because you see, as a math teacher, I want to make sure you're not going to sleep on me. And when the lights are down, I want you to think about this. When the lights are down for a group, whether it is a group of students in high school, in college, or when you have professionals, when the lights are down, your spirit goes like this, and you are in the movies. And if it's not really exciting, before you know it, your eyes begin to go down. Am I right? It is the human experience. And one of our challenges for the future is to find the right balance between technology and humanity, and the need for young people to understand nothing takes the place of relationships. That somehow the more we connect with people, using technology as a tool, but not letting technology take over. Give me a hand for that idea, using technology as a tool. Now, in the spirit of human relationships, I was told by one of my colleagues at UMBC that his mother-in-law would be in the audience, and her name is Lori Crawford. If you're here somewhere, raise your hand and let me just say hi to you. I want you to know I have learned how much people in Ohio love Ohio. Hey there. I want you to know that, Lori, because I want you to know we're taking care of your daughter and son-in-law and your grandchildren in Maryland. Give her family a round of applause, because they love Ohio. And some of you know that human experience. When your kids go to other places, you know, you really want them back home, but we're gonna treat them right, okay? Now, why would I take the time to do that? Because I'm making a point to you that even as I talk about the teaching and learning process, we begin with the notion that every human being whether he or she is a teacher or a student or a staff member, starts with a personal life. And I would argue that the environments that are most healthy, that are most productive, do not focus simply on the technology, don't even focus simply on the math and reading, but will focus on the human experience, on people broadly. And I want you to think about what that means. And so I want you to know that every person has a story. And our stories make us who we are. And now, as a mathematician, I'm first realizing that when I'm over here, I'm close to Laurie and the people right here, but I'm feeling way away. Wave your hands if you're with me over there. Can you? Because I can hardly see you, and I want to see your faces, right? So if you get bored, wave your hand, and I'll work on it, okay? And so I need to come out because who in the room, how many of you love to read? Let me see your hands. Now watch this. How many of you love mathematics? It's a pretty nerdy group. Congratulations. I like that. My campus is a nerdy place. We are very connected to the National Security Agency. And while we have students from 150 countries, we have large numbers of kids who are family members of military families. And so literally I have over 1,000 students at the National Security Agency, which is 20 minutes from my campus. And believe it or not, I have large numbers of students who actually get security clearances while still in high school. They work at NSA while still in high school, whether it's in the computational area, in cryptology, in languages, and so they come in with that. And so we talk a lot about math and reading and technology. And so right now, for how many math teachers in the room? Curriculum people, math people? Raise your hands high. Don't be ashamed. Say it, all right? So this is a minimization, maximization problem. You get it? I want to minimize the distance between me and the audience and maximize the interaction. I have a question for you. The president of Stanford said that they had been doing a study of college students to determine exactly how long they will listen to a lecture before they fade out. My question to you, how long do you think college students can concentrate before they fade out of a regular lecture? What do you think? Somebody said 5 seconds. He must have kids. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. He said 5 seconds. That's bad. Somebody else. 35 minutes. How many? 7 minutes. Anybody else? 40. It's actually 8 minutes. After 8 minutes, typically students. Now, the neuroscientists, I work a lot at NIH. The neuroscientists, my campus has a lot of partnerships with NIH, the National Institutes of Health, and they focus on the science of learning in many of those institutes, and they've, of course, studied it. What is the prescribed amount of time? What do we normally say about professionals? How long typically can you concentrate before you begin to fade out? I heard 30 minutes. Who else? Now, don't be risk adverse now. You got to be able to take risks, right? 8 minutes, anybody else? It's actually 20 minutes. It's 20 minutes. So I've been talking 3 minutes, so I figure I've got 16 minutes before you fade out on me completely. Now, the alternative is to be innovative and to use technology or other approaches. And this is why I said I wanted to show you some of the types of approaches we've been using on my own campus as we've been redesigning courses, from chemistry to psychology. And the first point is to recognize that large numbers of students, whether they're in the 9th grade or a freshman in college, will be bored in class. How many of you know that a lot of students, many in your schools, are bored every day? Raise your hands. Very good, very good. And so one of our challenges in this very, very technology-oriented society is to determine ways of using technology, but I would say of rethinking our thoughts and our assumptions about teaching and learning. And I would argue that our using stories, whether in literature or in math or across the board, can make a big difference in what happens. My newest book on Holding Fast to Dreams has a picture of a faculty member and 2 students. One of the students is African American, the other is a Korean immigrant, a young woman who came to this country when she was 8 They're all in biochemistry. He's a Howard Hughes investigator. They use visualization. They use high-powered computing. And what is interesting is they are looking at what looks like artwork, but in fact, it is HIV. If you Google Holding Fast to Dreams is my newest book, and you see the picture of the book there, you'll see what looks like colorful art. But in fact, it is HIV. And the dream that I talk about is that we teach our kids of all races to learn how to work together, to have the skills that they need in order to solve the problems of humankind. No problem we've seen in our world has been more devastatingly hard to solve than that of HIV. And yet my scientist, the Howard Hughes investigator, Dr. Summers, on my campus, has been able to determine through scientific visualization and technology 2 parts of the HIV virus, and to therefore help people in developing drugs that knock out those parts from the virus and render people able to continue to live. Give him a hand for the work he's doing to save the lives of people. Now, what I was just giving you in a sense was a story. I start with my own story. I grew up in Birmingham. Now, UMBC, the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, is in Baltimore. We like to say that Baltimore is the Upper South. Did you get that? Upper South. One day we think like people in Philadelphia, the next day we think like people in Richmond. It's been that way since the Civil War. But I grew up in the Deep South in Birmingham. Now, you know, you all would consider yourselves the Midwest, am I right? This is the Midwest. But in the South, we would just say you in the North. You're Yankees, all right? But Birmingham is the Deep South. And in the South, and some of you have relatives and connections there, we believe we're the best at weaving stories. If I give you a theory, you'll forget it, you'll go to sleep on me. But if I give you a story, you may listen. And there's some stories I tell all the time because they make my point about the significance of the skills and our approach to teaching and learning. One of those approaches is the use of technology. And here is my first story. My mother grew up in a little country town in a place called Wetumpka, Alabama. Wonderful little town outside of Montgomery. And interestingly enough, when she was 12, she had a choice of working in a hot cotton field or going and working in a wealthy home. And she wanted to see how wealthy people lived, whites, but wealthy people. And the defining characteristic of the home was not that it had a computer, because it was the 1930s, all right? But it had a library at a time when there was no library for children of color. And the only book she had, a wonderful book in her home, was the Bible. And the woman was kind to her and said, Maggie, when you finish your work, you can go into the library and read. And mother would do just that. And the woman was impressed with her and said, Maggie, take the book home. When you finish, bring it back, and we'll talk about it. And if you want, you can write me something about what you're reading. And interestingly enough, all of a sudden, my mother's girlfriends became very upset with her because they would say, Maggie, come on outside and play. And she would say, no, I want to keep reading this book. And of course, they would say, this isn't school time. Why would you want to take your time reading a book when it's not school? And it was then that she realized this growing difference between herself and her girlfriends. And here was the difference. She said, the more she read, the better a reader she became. And the better a reader she became, the more proficient, the more she enjoyed the experience. And the more she enjoyed reading, the more reading she did. There was no TV at that time, so she all of a sudden got really hooked on reading books. And what she found was that reading helped her to write more clearly, to speak more clearly, to appreciate standard English. And people would say, that's a special little girl. And that made her feel special. And the woman would talk to her about the books in life, and it was an amazing experience. And as a result, my mother said, I know exactly what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to teach English and literature. Give me a hand for the English teachers in America. And so all of my life, in our house, my mother was quoting poetry and different books. This is why I can quote, you know, you do what you see your mother doing and your father. And my dad would always say, boy, you're so lucky. I had to walk, he would say, he was from a little country town outside of Selma. He would say, I had to walk 5 miles to school every day. I got so tired of him telling me that story, I finally said, Dad, that's why your feet are so big. To which he responded, don't you get smart with me, boy. Old-fashioned values, right? But my mother would quote Zora Neale Hurston in her book, Their Eyes Were Watching God, which begins, and I'd hate hearing her doing it. Now it rings in my head. Ships at a distance have every man's wish on board. For some, they come in with the tide. For others, they sail forever on the horizon, never out of sight, never landing until the watcher turns his head away in resignation, his dreams mocked to death by time. That is the life of men, and my mother would say, and women, right? Hurston and my mother were talking about two groups of people we are concerned about. First, people whose dreams become reality. Every one of you in this place has had the good fortune to get the skills that you need, the values that you need, to have a job, to be responsible for taking care of other people's children, and to be respected in your communities, to be able to have housing and family support. And then they were talking about the people whose dreams are, in the words of Langston Hughes, forever deferred. And the fundamental difference between those whose dreams are realized and those whose dreams seem to go farther and farther away from the person will be the education they receive. Where would anybody here be if they had not learned to read, to think, to have the values, to know what it means to get up and go to work and those guys? If we could know that every child had learned to love to read and had developed math skills, and if we could give them the exposure to technology in several different ways, we'd know every kid was on his or her way. Now, I already know from talking to different people walking over here, I mean, some of the challenges, there's always this issue of having enough money to keep the technology updated, money for professional development, money for the infusion and integration. What has made the difference on our campus has been literally writing grants, working with people so we can give faculty and work with teachers in the schools the time that they need to figure out how to use the technology most effectively, whether in the teaching and learning process or on the administrative side. Because you want to think about the fact that the fundamental approaches to the use of technology in our business, whether it is at the university level or the K through 12, pre-K, I should say, through 12 level, really is this combination. On the one hand, how can we use technology so that, first of all, teaching and learning will not be so boring to kids. And secondly, so that we can understand more about what they understand and know and don't, and figure out ways of clarifying. It's like my scientist who was able to figure out structures in HIV because the technology allowed him to visualize. Visualization is a big concept in terms of technology and STEM areas. And on the other hand, how do we use technology as we think about everything from administrative efficiencies to E&E, effectiveness and efficiencies, to thinking about ways of doing things in more interesting ways to get the job done. So administrative and academic. Now, here is what I want you to know. I grew up in Birmingham. I was a little civil rights child leader. I had a chance to march with Dr. King. And it was quite an experience, and the experience and having to go to jail just because I wanted a better education. Just because I wanted a better education, because I didn't like getting the hand-me-down books from the white schools. And even though my parents did not want me to go, they trusted me enough to allow me to go at age 12. What that experience taught me, as painful as it was, is that children can be empowered to believe they can have some control over their destiny. That children can think more critically than we often think they can. I work with children all over the world. I've been in schools and worked with math and science teachers in South Africa with the head of the National Academy of Sciences from this country and from South Africa. And I remember talking about the use of technology, and I saw the smile on the teachers' faces, and this was maybe 15 years ago. And I said, I'm saying something wrong. What am I saying wrong? And finally, one of the teachers very respectfully said, Dr. Hrabowski, you're talking about technology. We don't even have electricity in our schools. You get my point? She said, but what we have are children who want to learn. And the attitude of our children will make the difference. We've got to believe that. We don't have the money we have, but the attitude. And what it did for me was to inspire me. This was before wireless or any of that. But what it did was to inspire me to think about the fact that, yes, we want to use the technology, but you could have plenty of technology. If we don't get our attitudes right, that's not just teachers, that's families, right? That's a community. If we don't understand the importance of what the dream should be and what the values should be, technology can't make a difference. There is something to be said about our understanding that it does take the whole village to raise the child, that we must teach parents and families. They have an important role to play in supporting the teachers in our schools. Give me a round of applause for that idea. Old-fashioned values, that is critical. And if somehow the situation is so bad that that teacher or that parent can't help, because we work, for example, on my campus with little kids in inner city Baltimore, and there are cases where there's nobody to help that child. We work on literally supervising a group of little children, hundreds of children, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And mine is a very upper middle class campus at the airport with 600 acres. But we have large numbers of people who work with kids who don't have anybody in the home to give them support. But the key of how to find that support. Now, after the 60s, how many of you were not even born in 1965? That is disgusting. I want you to know that. That is just disgusting. I almost want to tell you, get out of here. Wait a minute. Okay, where are my wonderful people who were in the world, had been born before 1965? Thank you so much for being in the audience, all right? The fact is that it's hard for people to understand how different in some ways the world was before the 60s. And I'm going to just give you a couple of examples. The Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, but then the Higher Education Act. How many of you in this room are either the first in your families or the first generation to go to college? Let me see your hands. Look around the room. This is, give a round of applause for that notion. It is a fascinating. And this is what Americans have not thought about. The fact that before the 60s, very few people had gone to college. In fact, here we go again. Before you fade out on me, it's been almost at 20 minutes, all right? Here's my question. What percent of Americans do you think in the 60s had completed college? What would you say? I heard 12%. 10, what did I hear? 5, somebody else. 18, anybody else? It was actually only 10%. And at that time, we broke everything down into black and white. We didn't talk about other groups. Everything was black and white. So what percent of whites had a college degree in 1964? 30, anybody else? 40, anybody else? It was only 11%. 11%. What percent of blacks? 2%, okay? But we didn't talk about other groups. Now, let me ask you a question. How many of you remember, and show you how much things were black and white, how many of you remember black and white TV? Now, how many of you would say TV's always been in color? That's disgusting. I want you to know that. That's how different the world is today, right? How many of you remember when there were only 2 or 3 TV stations? How many of you have always had a lot of TV stations on your TV? That's also disgusting, all right? But the point I'm making is the way the world has changed in technology will tell us a lot about where we're going as a society. Now, today, what percent have a college degree? What do you think? 45, anybody else? You're risk adverse. Come on, try it. You see, you all are accustomed to succeeding by being cool and waiting until somebody else gives the answer. 33%, anybody else? 60%, anybody else? And it's important for educators to know this. It's only, believe it or not, it is only 30%. Only 30% of Americans. Now, what percent of whites? 50, anybody else? 45, anybody else? It's only 37% today with a 4-year degree, okay? What percent of blacks? It is almost 20%. What's the fastest growing group in our country? Latino, Hispanics, right? What percent do you think? It's only 14, not quite 15%. What is the highest achieving group in America? Yeah, I know you don't want to say it, but what is it? It's Asian, right? Okay, they're at 55%. 20-some% of my students are of Asian descent. Now, and Native Americans is way below the 15%. What am I saying? I'm telling you this. All educators should understand this. More than 2/3 of all Americans over 25 did not complete college. All right? Now, the first thing I get from my friends of all races is this: that couldn't be true, Freeman. Everybody I know has a college degree. Duh. Teachers know teachers. Lawyers know lawyers. Doctors know doctors. And plumbers who make more money than any of y'all know plumbers. Give the plumbers a round of applause. The plumbers. There are some skills you can have and make a lot of money. But the fact that what I'm saying is that most don't. Now, here's my big question. How many of you are between the ages of 35 and 70? I got good news and bad. Which one you want first? Bad news is you're getting old. Get over it. It's okay. I'm over 60. It's cool. It's okay. There are alternatives, all right? But the good news is if you're an American and you're in that age range, you are the best educated in the world with the exception of Norway. Now, how many of you are between 25 and 34? They're so proud. Look at them. They're just so proud to say, we're not old like the rest of you all. I love it. I love it. I got good news and bad. Which one you want first? Bad news is you're not as smart as we are. I love saying that. I just love saying that, all right? And I'm just kidding, kinda, all right? Because here's my proof. The bad news is if you are an American and you are between 25 and 34, you are number 12. You are ranked number 12 in the world. The difference between that older generation and that, what is the difference? Everybody talks about, oh, so many people went off to college, right? You always hear 70% go to college or whatever, 2 or 4 year, whatever. The problem is most Americans, well over half, who start college do not graduate. And that has been the challenge. And the reason they don't graduate, more than the money issue, academic skills. In fact, if you look at the number one barrier to students, you will see it is developmental mathematics. And the reason there's such a connection between K through 12, and should be, and the higher ed sector, is that when we look at developmental math, whether it's at community colleges, four-year institutions, and you look at the graduation rates in your state and around the country, you'll see many institutions where the graduation rate is well below half. And if you look at what happened, they never got beyond that basic math requirement. And developmental math equates to about 6th and 7th grade math. So that whatever we can do to support people in the K through 12 space, so that when they graduate, they don't have to take developmental courses, we should be doing. And that's where the technology becomes very important. The technology, but also our attitudes. Let me ask you a question. How many of you knew by the time you were in the 11th grade that you were either a math, science type or you were a history, English, and arts type? Raise your hands. Look around the room. And there is what I would call the fundamental challenge in our country as I look at what happens in Korea, as I look at what happens in India and other places. Attitudes. We think some people were made to do math and science and the rest were not. I was always a math geek. Well, the reason was my mother started off as an English teacher and something came out called the new math. Anybody old enough to remember the new math? Thank you for being in the room. Thank you very much. All right. The new math. This is after Sputnik and the Russians were doing so well, and everybody realized if we were going to compete with Russia in science, we had to do something about the math, because the fact is, how many of you in this room really love math? Let me see your hands again. It's a pretty nerdy group. Congratulations. I'm really, really proud. Because usually only about 20% of any American audience. I was speaking at MIT yesterday, where I have a lot of my graduates in PhD programs, and of course when I said about the math, everybody's hand went up, just like on my campus. But the fact is this, that I want you to think about this. We are somehow given the message early on, well before college, that either it's for us or it's not. When I spoke to the National Math Council, Council of Math Teachers, then I spoke to the science, I said this: we don't even realize it, but we send messages to children all the time. And the message says this: if you're not really excited about it and getting it very quickly, then I'm saying, honey, don't come back next year. I'll help you this year, but don't come back next year. Because if I were to ask you the question, how did you know? How did you know that you were a math science type? Who wants to tell me? How did you know you were a math science type and not a history, English, and arts type, or that you were in one area or another? Somebody give me an answer. Somebody told him. Okay, was it a teacher or somebody else? Your dad told you, wow. Somebody else. The grades that you made, right? You make better grades in one area and you said, well, I must be better than that, right? Any other reason? Solving problems with fun. There's one of my math people, That's always the case when you got that, Anybody else? So performance makes a big difference. And so what I would say to you is this. Even when students leave high school and they say they're in science and engineering, they want to be in science and engineering, the statistics of weed out are unbelievable. I chaired the National Academy's committee to look at competitiveness and the underrepresentation issue. It didn't surprise people that only 20% of blacks and Hispanics who began with a major in science or engineering actually graduated with a bachelor's in those areas. What percent of whites do you think who began with a major in science or engineering graduate with a bachelor's in science and engineering? What do you think? 70%? Anybody else? It's only 31%. And for Asians, it's only 40%. What do we call first-year science and engineering in colleges and universities across America? Weed out courses. So if you get a chance, look at my TED Talk. It's on changing the culture of science. And that involves use of technology, but more important, it involves our attitudes. We make the assumption in universities that even the kids you send us who say they want to be in chemistry or in medicine or in engineering, even that group who've made A's and done well on AP or whatever kind of exam, whatever it is, even those kids, for the most part, 2/3, do not succeed at the university level. Not necessarily because they didn't have the skills, but it's about the need for universities to rethink the culture of the work. What we have done, I want you to write this down, the UMBC CDC, and that does not stand for the Center for Disease Control. It is the Chemistry Discovery Center. If you Google the UMBC Chemistry Discovery Center, you will find that we have rethought how we teach first-year chemistry. We no longer use lecturing. They work in groups. They have a PC there with them, and each of 4 people will have a role: a project manager, a blogger, a provocateur, and a technologist. And we don't give them the theories. They have to figure out the theories using problems from some of the biotech companies we have on our campus, started by our faculty. And the first thing you get from students, and these are students who have done really well in high school, is I don't need anybody. I don't want to work with anybody else. And the first thing I would say to you is our challenge is to help our students know that the most competitive countries in the world have taught their children how to problem solve in groups. So talking about technology and education is not about talking about a piece of equipment. It's about the approach we use in the teaching and learning process. It's about the attitudes we have about who can do the work. It's about finding strategies that can make a difference. And I will tell you, whether it's in solving a math problem or in working in chemistry or in working in labs where we use technology now to visualize, the fact is we start from the premise of expectations and assumptions about who can do the work. We have a way in this country of saying some people are smart in math and others just don't have it. Now, I was very fortunate because this mother of mine who was an English teacher decided she'd be brave. They said, who will go back and learn the new math? And everybody was saying, oh, no, I'm scared of math. So she went back to learn the new math. My dad liked math, so he would work with her too. And what's interesting is this. This is what she learned. The better the child could read and think, the more effectively that child could learn to solve word problems. Because you see, story problems or word problems are not expressed in numbers. They are expressed, obviously, in language. Give me a child who can read well, and I can teach her to solve word problems. Because here's the challenge. If you get a word problem or a story problem, the person has to understand the relationships among the words. And then in some cases, you're looking at using logic to solve it, or you're putting it into an equation. But what is it that the American child will say? Give me the equation. I don't like word problems. Give me 5x plus 5 equals 15. They want what's rote. And we have to get away from that idea. So I was my mother's guinea pig. She was using me to learn poetry and the reading, but also to look at how you solve word problems and the thought process. Now, since so many of you love math, I'm going to do what I do with CEOs, what I've done with people in other countries. I'm going to give you a math problem. Now, this is a 6th grade math problem and I'm going to challenge you later on to see how you might even use the technology to have a story and how children can use the technology to look at the possibilities, the combinations. Here's my question to you. If I told you that this problem was in the Baltimore Sun and that a lot of teachers couldn't do it and a lot of PhDs can't do it at first, and that I don't want you to holler out an answer, but it is a 6th grade problem from the College Board, and I told you, do not Google the problem. Do not Google the problem. Did you hear me? If you Google the problem right now, it's cheating. You got it? And do not holler out an answer. Now, here's my question. How many of you would like to go for the competition? If somebody can solve this problem in the next 2 minutes, once I give it, I will give you $1,000. If you're willing to do that, stand up right now. I'll give you $1,000 if you can solve this problem. Let me see who you are. Stand up and be proud and give them a round of applause. Now keep standing, keep standing, keep standing. There's only one caveat. If you can't solve the problem, you got to give me $500. And I don't take checks. Anybody still with me? Oh, wow, look over here. Give them a round of applause. Now, that is what I call confidence. I love it. I love it. But since I don't have $1,000, thank you anyway. You may have a seat, all right? Why did I do that? I would call it metacognitive thinking. Why? Because I wanted you to see how much more engaged you became when you heard that $1,000. You get my point? And then you wanted to see who else. We have to have ways of pulling students in. And then secondly, I wanted you to think about your level of confidence. But third, I want you to think about this. In any classroom, when a problem is presented, there will be 3 groups of people. Those, like the ones who stood, bring it on. Those on the other side, like some of you who were saying, why would he waste my time giving us a math problem? And then those in the middle who were thinking, well, I'm not that good, but I'll try it, right? Here's the problem. Do not holler out an answer. 29 children are in a class. 20 have dogs. 15 have cats. How many have both a dog and a cat? 29 kids are in the class. 20 have dogs. 15 have cats. How many have both a dog and a cat? I'll ask my other question one more time. Is there somebody willing to go with the $1,000 deal? Stand up if you are. Do not say anything. Let me see who you are. Now you understand that if you are wrong, you must give me $500, right? How many? Raise your hands and make sure I see you. Let me see how many I have. Now here's my math problem to everybody in the room. Here we go again. How many people must be wrong for me to know I'll make money on this deal? You see the math problem? How many people have to be wrong for me to know I'm still in good shape? You get my point? Give them a big round of applause. I'm very impressed. They're very confident. Very confident. Here's my other point to everybody in the room, though. You are 20th century thinkers. Why do I say that? Almost nobody thought to say, let me see if I can work with somebody else on 2 levels. One, to bounce my ideas off of, to work on it, number 1. And then number 2, if we pool our money together, we got a better deal going here, right? And if you got 5 people, for example, you know, each person at most would give, you can go through all the combinations of what you can have. But I'm saying I want you, in thinking about technology, to think about how you can use the technology to encourage groups to work together. Not just in math. We do it in course redesign, in technology and writing. You can get much more done in individualized work by having students, for example, if you look at our first year course, we've had articles written on it, first year writing course. If you think about the notion that if you've got several students looking at a piece of writing together through technology, and then having those students critique that piece of writing while the teacher works with an individual. So you can have groups working on the writing experience, because learning how to evaluate somebody else's writing, to find the errors, to look at the coherence and those things, those are all wonderful experiences and skills that they will need. So technology can be used, obviously, not just in this chemistry or in our math course, but also in writing and psychology and whatever. Very important. Second point, the notion of grit. I want American audiences to get away from the notion that these kids are smart and these kids are not, or these kids are good in math and these kids are not. The Chesapeake Bay Retriever is our mascot. There is a dog, a statue, Laurie, right out in front of the athletic building. And the tradition is that you do not take a final until you rub his nose. And people laugh, but that nose is very shiny, all right? And the name of the dog is True Grit. True Grit. And we asked students the question, what does grit mean? And we're talking about the hard work, the determination, the not giving up, the persistence, and most important, the resilience. The fact is that anybody will make mistakes. Is your school one in which people are allowed to make mistakes with the technology, or in what they understand and don't? Or is it one where people feel embarrassed when they can't do something? There is the challenge, because if we teach students to be resilient, it makes all the difference in the world. And so True Grit, we call our university the House of Grit. I'm not interested in somebody who can just get it like that. I got my worst grades in my mother's class in the 8th grade. She was a math and English specialist, and I would go really fast. But what she would do sometimes is to give us work from a week before. And while I might have been able to get it really well at first, because I had grasped it like that, I would have forgotten it. A lot of times when kids are fast in grasping something, they're also fast in forgetting it. Sometimes when a student takes longer to get something, to understand a concept, she'll never forget it. You get my point? We in America tend to think that speed means smart. Just not true. Sometimes a student who takes longer to think something through, or even to understand the use of technology, will then be able to use it most effectively because they've made it a part of themselves. Very, very important. And so the question I want you to think about is, how can I use innovative approaches of collaboration, of use of technology to teach each other, of having one group of students working with another, and of breaking it up so I'm not just standing there, and of finding ways of having the time. Jamie and Ben were two people who walked over with me, and I asked them, what's important to tell this audience? They said, and it was very nice. They said, one thing was, remind us that we're all teachers. Whether we are in the classroom or educators or technicians, people working with people, we're all teaching all the time. And then they said, take the time to figure out how we can use the technology, which is challenging, I know, because of the elements and all the circumstances in the school, but it does take time for professional development to keep talking about the need to use it. Really important. And then the notion of struggle. Anybody who does something that is important knows it takes that struggle and that hard work to make it done. By the way, how many of you solved that math problem by now? And how many of you, now I will tell you, 90% of you do not have the answer. Because the obvious answer is not the full answer. I'll give you that clue. Secondly, I am not going to tell you the answer. Because in America, we believe in what's called immediate gratification. Even CEOs want to know it like that, right? In other countries, I am amazed, and some of my students who come from other countries, how they are comfortable spending 24 hours working on it. Because if you think about it, the hardest problems, the most interesting problems are not solved like that. It takes time. What I want you to do today is to discuss the problem with each other. Math teachers, I don't want you using Venn diagrams. I want you to think about children and rows of children and dogs. And I will tell you, I love doing it with 5th graders and 4th graders, even with college students, by having them act it out. You know, you write D's, 20 D's and C and 15 C's, and then you have them in line, and then you have the other people look at them and look at the relationships. and then you have them discuss it and argue about it. You want teaching and learning to be an active, passionate approach. It's not just sitting down, taking notes, or looking at a screen. It has to be the interaction that brings about the thought. And here is the point for my people who have gotten it. The real issue is not whether you get an answer. It is how can you help a 12-year-old pull out of that 12-year-old the questions necessary for the young girl or boy to get it herself. What we tend to do is to solve the problem, write it on the board, and then say, do what I did. That is not critical thinking. And the whole point about technology should be, it just helps us with the critical thinking idea. You know, as I close, at the end of my mother's life, we had brought her from Birmingham to Baltimore. She didn't want to leave because of her church. We got churches here, Ma. And she comes up, and she's such an amazing woman. She was able to hide from us that she had dementia. And she didn't even know who I was. She knew I was familiar. And one day she said, I know the end is near. And you don't want to hear your mother say that. And I said, what's important to you? And she said, relationships. She smiled, the sweetest smile, and said, my relationship with my God. She said, hold on to your faith. And then she said, my relationship with my husband. He's a wonderful man. She'd forgotten Dad had died 20 years before. And then she shocked me. I'm an only child now. She looked me right in my face and she said, you know, I have a son. All of my grief turned to anger. I'm thinking, oh my God, she had a kid when she's a teenager, never told me about it. Now she's gonna drop this in my lap, right? I am not a happy guy. I'm saying like my students, TMI, right? And then she said, he's a college president. I'd forgotten she didn't know who I was. But then she gave me the gift I leave you with. She said, I now understand that teachers touch eternity through their students. Teachers touch eternity through their students. Whatever I had to give, my lust for learning, my belief in those children, I gave it to them, and I will always live through them. I went back and spoke in Birmingham, and all these people came up and said, your mama taught me to read, or my mama taught me to love to read. And your mama went to the projects and told my grandmama, let me go to college. And because of your mother, we've moved out of poverty, and we're doing so much better. And so I challenge you to remember, the work that you do is more noble than any other in humankind. And to watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become your habits. Watch your habits, they become your character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny, dreams, and values. Ohio, you are a special place, and you can be even better. Thank you all very much.